It was a small thing, no bigger than a man's thumb, cast from dull brass that had long surrendered its shine. Its teeth were elaborate, a fine arrangement of cuts and grooves that spoke of one singular, specific purpose. Yet for all its apparent precision, it was a key that seemed to defy all reason. It had been discovered tucked inside a concealed compartment, a secret folded within a secret in the study of Elias Montgomery, the recently departed patriarch of Montgomery Plantation. For weeks it had moved from hand to hand, its cold metal a persistent, unsettling presence. Every lock across the sprawling estate, from the imposing front doors of the main house to the rusted padlocks on the most distant storage sheds, had been tested against it. Not one yielded, not a single one. The key simply would not fit. It was an anomaly, a silent question mark in a world constructed upon order and certainty, and its very existence hinted at a truth far more disturbing than any locked door could ever conceal. What could be so vital, so utterly hidden, that it demanded a key to a lock that seemingly did not exist? Montgomery Plantation spread across the fertile lowlands of a nameless county deep in the American South. Its acres of cotton stretched like an endless white sea beneath the relentless sun. Founded in the late 1700s, the estate had grown with each successive generation of Montgomerys, becoming a cornerstone of the local economy and an enduring symbol of prosperity. The main house, a grand two-story structure of whitewashed brick and towering columns, sat atop a gentle rise, its wide verandas offering a sweeping view of the fields and the distant shimmering river. Yet despite its commanding facade, a subtle air of decay clung to the place. Paint peeled in neglected corners. The scent of damp earth and aging wood permeated the shadowed hallways, and the once manicured gardens had begun reclaiming their wilder nature, a testament to the passage of time and perhaps a certain weariness that had settled into the family itself. The Montgomerys were a respected, if somewhat guarded, family. Elias Montgomery, the recently departed patriarch, had been a man of formidable will and quiet authority. His presence had been a constant, unyielding force on the plantation for more than 50 years. He was a man of few words, his thoughts habitually concealed behind a stern, unreadable expression. But his decisions were absolute, shaping the lives of everyone beneath his roof, both free and enslaved. His wife Martha had passed many years before, leaving him with 2 children, Thomas and Clara. Thomas, the eldest, was now in his late 30s. A man weighed down by the burden of expectation. He carried his father's serious manner but lacked Elias's innate command. He was meticulous, methodical, a man who found comfort in ledgers and routines. Yet beneath his composed exterior lay a nervous energy, a constant need for order that bordered on anxiety. He had married Eleanor, a woman from an equally prominent neighboring family. Eleanor was delicate, given to bouts of melancholy, her beauty frequently overshadowed by a pervasive sense of unease. She drifted through the grand house like a ghost, her rustling skirts the only sound in the quiet halls, her eyes often fixed on some distant, unseen point. Clara, Thomas's younger sister, was a woman of quiet strength and sharp observation. She had never married, choosing instead to remain at Montgomery, tending to the household and her ailing mother before her passing. She possessed a keen mind, often concealed behind a demure facade, and a deep, almost instinctive understanding of the unspoken currents flowing beneath the surface of family life. She was the one who noticed the subtle shifts in mood, the fleeting glances, the silences that said everything. The plantation itself was a microcosm of the antebellum South. The rhythms of life were dictated by the seasons and the demands of the cotton crop. The sounds of distant field songs, the creak of the water wheel, the clatter of kitchen implements, and the hushed conversations of house servants formed the constant backdrop to their existence. Overseer Finch, a burly, taciturn man with a perpetually sunburnt neck, managed the day-to-day operations of the fields, his presence a stark reminder of the brutal realities underpinning their genteel lives. Within the main house, Auntie May, a woman whose age was a mystery but whose wisdom was beyond question, presided over the domestic staff. She had served the Montgomerys for generations, her eyes having witnessed the rise and fall of many seasons, her memory holding more secrets than any family ledger. Life at Montgomery was a carefully constructed portrait of Southern gentility. But beneath the veneer of civility and tradition, there were whispers. Whispers of Elias Montgomery's fierce privacy, of certain rooms that were always locked, of a quietness that was not entirely peaceful. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for something to shatter the fragile calm. This was the world into which the mysterious key would fall, a world ripe for unraveling. Elias Montgomery's passing was not sudden, but a slow, deliberate retreat from the world he had so fiercely controlled. For nearly a year, his formidable constitution had been steadily eroded by a persistent cough that deepened with every passing month, and a weariness that settled into his bones like the damp river fog. He spent his final weeks confined to his bedchamber, the heavy velvet curtains drawn against the intruding sunlight, the air thick with the scent of camphor and fading life. His voice, once a resonant command, had dwindled to a raspy whisper, and his piercing gaze, though still sharp, now carried a distant, almost haunted quality. Thomas, ever the dutiful son, had overseen the plantation's affairs throughout his father's decline, his brow perpetually furrowed by the twin burdens of management and impending grief. Eleanor flitted in and out of the sick room, offering cool cloths and hushed prayers, her own delicate constitution strained by the somber atmosphere. Clara, however, spent hours at her father's bedside, reading passages from the family Bible, her quiet presence a comfort Elias seemed to tolerate, if not actively welcome. She observed the subtle changes in his breathing, the way his fingers, gnarled with age, would occasionally twitch as though reaching for something unseen. On a sweltering August afternoon in 1860, as the cicadas hummed their relentless chorus outside, Elias Montgomery finally drew his last breath. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by Clara's soft gasp and the distant mournful cry of a field hand. The news spread through the plantation like a ripple across still water, reaching the furthest cabins and the closest neighbors. With surprising speed, a pall settled over Montgomery, a heavy, tangible grief that mingled with the oppressive heat. The funeral was a grand, somber affair, as befitted a man of Elias's standing. Carriages from neighboring plantations, their wheels kicking up dust along the long drive, lined the approach to the house. The air was thick with the scent of wilting, magnolia, and the cloying sweetness of funeral lilies. Thomas, dressed in a heavy black suit that seemed to absorb the heat, stood stiffly beside Eleanor, accepting condolences with a tight, almost mechanical nod. His grief was a private, internal thing, overshadowed by the immense responsibility that now rested squarely on his shoulders. He felt the full weight of his father's legacy pressing down upon him, a legacy built on generations of toil and unspoken sacrifices. He was a man of his word. Thomas offered Mr. Bogart, a stout, red-faced planter from a few miles downriver, his voice booming despite the solemnity. "A pillar of this community. You have big shoes to fill, son." Thomas merely inclined, his head, the words echoing the very anxieties already gnawing at him. Eleanor, her face pale beneath her black veil, clutched his arm, her own apprehension palpable. Clara, dressed in simple black, stood a little apart, her gaze sweeping across the assembled mourners, her expression unreadable. She noticed the way some of the older house servants, particularly Auntie May, kept their eyes cast downward, their faces etched with a complex mixture of sorrow and something else. Something akin to relief, or perhaps a profound and bone-deep weariness. The burial took place in the family plot. nestled beneath a grove of ancient oaks draped with Spanish moss. The earth was hard and unyielding, resisting the spades of the grave diggers. As the coffin was lowered, a collective sigh seemed to rise from the assembled crowd. For Thomas, it was not merely the end of his father's life, but the beginning of his own true test. He was now the master of Montgomery, and the weight of that title felt heavier than any grief. He knew with a chilling certainty that his father had left behind far more than land and ledgers. Elias Montgomery had been a man of secrets, and Thomas felt an unsettling premonition that those secrets would soon demand their reckoning. The weeks following Elias's funeral blurred into a succession of condolences, legal formalities, and the daunting task of settling the estate. Thomas, true to his methodical nature, began with his father's study, the nerve center of Montgomery Plantation. It was a room that had always carried a certain mystique, a place where Elias conducted business, read his books, and, it was rumored, kept his deepest thoughts. The air within was perpetually still, thick with the scent of aged paper, pipe tobacco, and the faint metallic tang of ink. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the heavy-drawn curtains, illuminating shelves crammed with leather-bound ledgers, legal documents, and forgotten curiosities. Thomas approached the task with a mixture of reverence and trepidation. He meticulously sorted through stacks of correspondence, organized financial records, and catalogued the contents of his father's desk. It was slow, painstaking work, each document a fragment of Elias's life, each ledger entry a testament to his meticulous control. One afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent and cast long shadows across the polished mahogany desk, Thomas found himself examining a small, ornate, wooden box. It was a simple, unadorned piece crafted from dark, heavy wood that had always sat in the corner of Elias's desk, appearing empty, a mere decorative object. He picked it up, struck by its unexpected weight. As he turned it over in his hands, his fingers brushed against a subtle seam along the bottom edge. A faint click, almost imperceptible, echoed in the quiet room. His heart gave a small lurch. He pressed harder, and a narrow panel, expertly concealed, slid open with a soft sigh of displaced air. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single object. The key. Small, tarnished brass, with an intricate and almost delicate pattern of teeth. It felt cool and heavy in his palm, a tangible piece of his father's hidden world. Thomas stared at it, a frown creasing his brow. He had never seen this key before, nor had he ever seen his father use it. He tried to recall any mention of it, any hint of its purpose, but his memory offered nothing. He called for Eleanor, his voice echoing slightly in the large house. She appeared moments later, her expression one of mild concern. "Thomas, is everything all right?" she asked softly. He held out the key. "Look at this, Eleanor. I found it in a hidden compartment in Father's old box. Do you recognize it?" Eleanor took the key, turning it over in her slender fingers, her brow furrowing to mirror his own confusion. "No, I don't believe I have. It's quite old, isn't it? And so particular. What do you suppose it opens?" "That is precisely what I intend to discover," Thomas replied, a new spark of determination lighting his eyes. The key, an unexpected legacy, had ignited a flicker of curiosity within him, a desire to understand this final, enigmatic piece of his father's life. He felt a strange pull, as if the key itself were a silent challenge, a final puzzle left by Elias Montgomery for his son to solve. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his gut that this small brass object was more than just a key. It was a question, and he was compelled to find its answer. The discovery of the key transformed Thomas's methodical approach to the estate into a focused, almost desperate quest. The initial curiosity quickly deepened into a persistent itch, a nagging question that refused to be silenced. He began his search systematically, starting with the most obvious candidates within the main house. Every locked door, every chest, every cabinet, every desk drawer was subjected to the key's intricate teeth. He started in the study, then moved through the drawing room, the dining hall, the various parlors, and the numerous bedchambers. The grand heavy doors, the delicate latches of antique armoires, the sturdy locks of the linen presses, none yielded. The key would slide in, turn a fraction, and then meet unyielding resistance, refusing to engage with the tumblers. Eleanor, initially intrigued, soon grew weary of the constant clinking and rattling. "Are you quite certain it's a key for a lock, Thomas?" she asked one evening, watching him try it on a small, locked jewelry box that had belonged to her mother. "Perhaps it's merely ornamental." "Ornamental? Father kept nothing ornamental in a hidden compartment, Eleanor," Thomas retorted, his voice sharper than he intended. "Everything had a purpose. This key has a purpose." Clara, however, watched his efforts with quiet intensity. She would often follow him, a silent shadow, as he moved from room to room, her eyes scanning the walls, the floorboards, the ceilings, as if searching for some hidden clue. "Perhaps it's not in the main house," she suggested one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. "Father had many places he kept things." Her words spurred Thomas to widen his search. He ventured beyond the main house, his determination hardening with each failed attempt. He tried the key on the locks of the smokehouse, the root cellar, the carriage house, the stables, and the various storage sheds scattered across the property. He even tried it on the heavy iron gate leading to the family cemetery, a morbid thought that sent a shiver down his spine. The key remained stubbornly unyielding, a silent testament to its unique and unknown purpose. The house servants, particularly Auntie May, observed Thomas's increasingly frantic search with a mixture of curiosity and knowing silence. Auntie May, her face a roadmap of wrinkles and wisdom, would sometimes pause in her duties to watch Thomas from a distance, a faint, almost imperceptible frown upon her lips. One morning, as Thomas was attempting the key on a locked cabinet in the pantry, she approached him, her movements slow and deliberate. "Mr. Thomas," she began, her voice raspy with age. "That key, it got a story, I reckon. Old Master Elias, he kept his secrets closer than most folks keep their kin." Thomas turned, his eyes alight with desperate hope. "Auntie May, do you know what this key opens? Have you ever seen it before?" She shook her head slowly, her gaze drifting distant. "Can't say I seen that particular key. No, but I seen the way. Master Elias was with things he wanted hid. He was mighty good at it. Mighty good." Her words, though offering no direct answer, only deepened the mystery, suggesting a deliberate, almost masterful act of concealment. The implication was clear. Elias had not merely misplaced the key's corresponding lock. He had ensured it would be extraordinarily difficult to find. The futile search stretched into weeks, then months. The key, once a mere object, began to take on a symbolic weight. It became a constant presence in Thomas's pocket, its cold metal a reminder of his father's final enigmatic challenge. The initial frustration gave way to a growing unease, a feeling that the key was not simply a puzzle, but a silent accusation. The community, too, began to whisper. The Montgomerys, always a private family, now seemed consumed by a strange and inexplicable quest. The key, the missing lock, the patriarch's secrets. These became fodder for hushed conversations in parlors and general stores, adding yet another layer of unsettling mystery to the already quiet and reserved Montgomery plantation. The relentless, fruitless search for the key's lock began to chip away at Thomas Montgomery's meticulous composure. What had started as a dutiful inquiry into his father's affairs slowly, insidiously morphed into a consuming obsession. The key, once a mere object, became a tangible manifestation of a question that gnawed at his waking thoughts and invaded his restless sleep. He carried it everywhere, its cool brass a constant weight in his waistcoat pocket, a silent and mocking presence. He would often pull it out, turning it over and over in his fingers, tracing the intricate pattern of its teeth, as if by sheer repetition its secret might reveal itself. His duties on the plantation, once performed with precise diligence, began to suffer. Ledgers lay untended, correspondence piled up, and decisions regarding the crops and the enslaved workforce were made with a distracted air. Overseer Finch, a man who valued order and efficiency above all else, grew increasingly frustrated. "Mr. Thomas," he grumbled one sweltering afternoon, wiping sweat from his brow with a calloused hand. "The south field needs rotating, and the new hands ain't properly assigned. Begging your pardon, sir, but your mind seems to be elsewhere." Thomas merely nodded vaguely, his gaze already fixed on some distant corner of the house, his thoughts replaying every failed attempt to match the key. Eleanor watched his transformation with growing alarm. Her delicate features, already prone to melancholy, now bore a perpetual expression of worry. She would find him late at night wandering the darkened halls, a flickering oil lamp in hand, trying the key on some forgotten cupboard or a loose floorboard. The soft click of the key, followed by the inevitable sigh of disappointment, became a haunting lullaby in their quiet home. "Thomas, please," she pleaded one evening, her voice trembling. "You are wearing yourself thin. It is just a key. Perhaps it was meant for something long gone, something Father discarded years ago." He turned to her, his eyes hollowed by lack of sleep, a feverish intensity burning within them. "No, Eleanor. Father never discarded anything of importance. This key means something. It is a part of him, a part of this house that he deliberately concealed, and I will not rest until I understand why." His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried an unshakable conviction that chilled her to the bone. Clara, ever the silent observer, noticed the subtle shifts in her brother's demeanor. She saw the slight trembling in his hands, the way his gaze would drift and lose itself in thought. She also noticed the way Auntie May watched Thomas, her ancient eyes filled with a profound sadness, as if she already knew the path he was treading and could foresee its inevitable, painful destination.
The atmosphere in the house, already heavy with Elias's absence, became charged with Thomas's growing obsession, a silent, suffocating presence that permeated every room. The key, once a simple mystery, had become a wedge, slowly driving a rift between Thomas and his family, and between him and the orderly world he had once so carefully maintained. Thomas's obsession, fueled by the key's stubborn silence, began to bend his methodical mind toward increasingly unconventional avenues. If the lock wasn't physical, perhaps the secret lay in something less tangible, something recorded or deliberately unrecorded. He retreated to his father's study, not to sort, but to scrutinize. He pored over old family Bibles, their brittle pages filled with generations of births, marriages, and deaths. He examined property deeds, wills, and the plantation's meticulous financial ledgers, searching for any anomaly, any entry that seemed out of place. The scent of dust and decaying paper became his constant companion. It was in a forgotten chest, tucked beneath a pile of moth-eaten blankets in the attic, that he found a collection of old federal census records. These were not official copies, but Elias's own meticulously transcribed versions dating back decades, filled with his precise, spidery handwriting. Thomas, driven by a vague and unsettling premonition, began comparing them year by year, name by name. He started with the 1840 census, then 1850, then the most recent 1860, cross-referencing the names of family members, the enslaved population, and the overseers, noting every detail. The first discrepancy was subtle, almost imperceptible. In the 1840 census, under the household of Elias Montgomery, there was an entry for a female child aged approximately 2 years. Her name was listed simply as child. This was not unusual for the time, particularly for very young children. However, when he turned to the 1850 census, the entry for this child had vanished entirely. There was no record of her death, no mention of her having left the household. no trace whatsoever. It was as if she had been erased from existence. Thomas's heart gave a cold, hard thump against his ribs. He went back, re-examining the 1840 record. Child, female, age 2. He then looked again at the 1850 record. Nothing? He checked the 1860 record. Still nothing. It was not a clerical error. Elias's transcriptions were far too precise for that. It was a deliberate omission, a life erased. The realization sent a chill down his spine, far colder than the damp attic air. He descended from the attic with the census records clutched in his trembling hand, the brass key still heavy in his pocket. He found Eleanor in the parlor, attempting to embroider, though her stitches were uneven, her mind clearly elsewhere. "Eleanor," he said, his voice strained. "I found something. Something deeply disturbing." She looked up, her eyes wide with apprehension. "What is it, Thomas? You look as if you've seen a ghost." He laid the census records on the polished table, pointing a trembling finger at the entries. In 1840, there was a child, a female child aged 2, living in this house. By 1850, she was gone. Not dead, not moved away. Simply unrecorded, erased. For 40 years, Father maintained this deception. Why, Eleanor? Why would he hide a child? Eleanor stared at the documents, her face draining of color. The implications hung heavy in the air between them, unspoken but understood. A child hidden from the world, deliberately removed from all official record. The key, the missing lock, the erased child. The pieces, though still disparate fragments, were beginning to coalesce into a terrifying, unspeakable whole. The quiet house suddenly felt vast and menacing, its walls no longer offering comfort but instead holding the suffocating weight of a decades-old lie. The discovery of the census discrepancy ignited a new and more terrifying urgency in Thomas's quest. The key was no longer merely a puzzle. It was a symbol of a life deliberately erased, a silent testament to a profound and hidden truth. His methodical nature, once a source of comfort, now became a relentless engine, driving him deeper into the labyrinth of his father's past. He returned to the study, but this time his gaze was different. He was no longer looking for a lock. He was searching for a hidden space, a place where a life could be concealed. He began examining the architecture of the house with a forensic eye. He tapped along walls, measured rooms, compared blueprints, where they existed and where they didn't. Relied on his intimate knowledge of the house's construction. He noticed subtle inconsistencies, a wall that seemed thicker than it should be, a window that didn't quite align with its exterior counterpart, a section of floorboard that sounded hollower than the rest. The house, once a familiar sanctuary, now felt like a complex, living entity, full of hidden passages and unspoken truths. His search led him to the older parts of the house, particularly the servants' quarters and the less frequented storage areas. He spent hours in dusty, forgotten corners, his lamp casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock his efforts. He questioned Annie Mae again, more directly this time, his voice low and urgent. He found her in the kitchen, kneading dough, with practiced hands, a scent of yeast and wood smoke filling the air. "Auntie Mae," Thomas began, his voice strained, "I need you to tell me everything you know about my father's secrets, about any hidden rooms, any unusual arrangements." She paused, her hands still in the dough, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the window. Her face, usually a mask of quiet composure, seemed to tighten. "Mr. Thomas," she said slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "Some secrets ain't meant for the light. Some secrets, they bury themselves deep, like roots in the earth. And sometimes, it's best to let them stay buried." "But there was a child, Auntie Mae," Thomas pressed, his voice cracking slightly. "A child erased from the census, a child my father hid. Do you know of her?" Auntie Mae's eyes, ancient and weary, finally met as a profound sadness, mixed with a deep and almost fearful resignation, settled across her features. She sighed, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to carry the weight of decades. Master Elias, he was a hard man, and he had his reasons. Always had his reasons. There was a room, yes, up near the old nursery, but not the nursery itself. A small place, always locked, always quiet. She paused, her gaze drifting back to the dough. He built it himself, mostly, with some help, but he oversaw every nail, every plank. Her words were a revelation, a confirmation of his darkest suspicions. A small room near the old nursery, always locked, the key, the child, the hidden room. The pieces were finally falling into place, forming a picture more horrifying than anything he could have imagined. He felt a cold dread settle in his stomach, a premonition of the unspeakable truth that awaited him. The house, once a symbol of his family's legacy, now felt like a tomb, holding a secret that had festered for 40 years, waiting for the right key to unlock its horrors. armed with anti-maze, cryptic but invaluable guidance. Thomas's search narrowed, focusing with laser-like precision on the upper floor, specifically the area surrounding the old nursery. The nursery itself, long unused, was a dusty, silent room filled with the ghosts of childhood. But Auntie May had said near the old nursery, not the nursery itself. He began his meticulous examination there, tapping along the walls, listening for any change in resonance, running his hands over every inch of plaster, searching for seams and subtle imperfections. The air in the hallway was thick with the scent of old wood and disuse, and the silence was so profound it seemed to press in on him. Hours passed. His fingers grew raw, his shoulders ached, but he pressed on, driven by a relentless, almost feverish determination. Eleanor, seeing his intensity, had retreated, leaving him to his solitary and unsettling quest. Clara, however, occasionally appeared at the end of the hallway, a silent, watchful presence, her eyes reflecting a mixture of apprehension and a strange, quiet understanding. It was late afternoon when he found it. Between the old nursery and a seldom used guest bedroom, there was a section of wall that felt subtly different. The plaster, though expertly matched, seemed to give just a fraction under his touch. He tapped it again, and this time the sound was distinctly hollow, a dull thud rather than the solid thwack of a load-bearing wall. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence. He fetched a small, sturdy chisel and a hammer from the toolshed, his hands trembling slightly. With careful, deliberate movements, he began to chip away at the plaster. Dust, fine and ancient, billowed into the air, catching the last rays of the setting sun. Beneath the plaster, he found not brick but a cleverly concealed wooden panel, its edges almost perfectly flush with the surrounding wall. It was a masterpiece of hidden craftsmanship, designed to blend seamlessly and disappear into the very fabric of the house. His fingers traced the outline of the panel, searching for a latch, a handle, anything. And then he saw it. A small, almost invisible keyhole nestled discreetly within the grain of the wood. It was old, dark, and almost entirely obscured by decades of dust and grime.